Sometimes a story is so improbable, so grotesquely improbable, that it feels as if it belongs more in mythology than modern aviation. And the tale of Vishwash Kumar Ramesh, the sole survivor of Air India Flight 171, is one of those stories. A man who, by sheer confluence of seat number, structure, split-second reaction, and what can only be called outrageous fortune, walked away from a catastrophe that killed 241 people in the air and several more on the ground, and yet he lived. Not only that, he stood and ran. The flight took off from Ahmedabad en route to London Gatwick, and it was a Boeing 787-8 Dreamliner, heavy with fuel, lifting awkwardly into the sky. Before barely 30 seconds into the air, it stalled, fell, and smashed into a medical college hostel below. What followed was an inferno. Entire families were obliterated, and in the middle of all that, one man emerged. And Vishwash was in seat 11A, an emergency exit seat beside the wing route, known to aviation engineers as the wing box, the most structurally reinforced area of a commercial jet. And that detail, seemingly banal when booking a flight, would become the fulcrum between life and death. And the variables, according to Tony Cable, the former senior air crash investigator for the UK, the aircraft hit nose up, meaning the fuselage likely fractured near the front around Ramesh's seat. And that rupture, or perhaps the emergency exit itself, torn loose, created an aperture, a way out, and that alone wouldn't have saved him. He had to be conscious, he had to be mobile, he had to act. And Professor John McDermott of York's Safety Research Group points to the reinforcement of the wing box. It likely prevented the cabin from compressing entirely around him. Moreover, the lack of a seat in front gave him the unencumbered space to absorb the shock without being hurled into the seat back. A horrifying inversion. The very emptiness that might feel lonely in flight became his salvation. And then there's fire. Professor Ed Gallier of the University of Greenwich, an expert in evacuation, put it more starkly. Ramesh had seconds. If he had not acted immediately, the fireball from the ignited fuel, enough to carry the plane to London, would have enveloped him. Ramesh pushed himself out by leg or instinct or desperation, blooded, dazed, his arm burned. He walked away. He joins a tragic fraternity. Julien Kopecka, who fell 10,000 feet strapped to her seat into the Peruvian jungle and survived. Vesna Vulovic, who tumbled from a disintegrating Yugoslav jet at 33,000 feet. Cecilia Croker, aged 4, the lone survivor of Flight 255. Ruben van Asso, who fished from the Libyan desert wreckage at 9 years old. These cases are not miracles in the theological sense. They are what Stephen Wood, an expert in disaster medicine, calls confluences of rare but explainable factors: location, structure, reaction, accident, geometry, and brutally, luck. But no amount of structural integrity can make sense of the psychological aftermath. Ramesh lost his brother on the flight. He saw cabin crew die in front of him. In his words, "When I opened my eyes, I saw I was alive." But the problem with surviving is not just the trauma of the crash, it's the haunting, echoing question of why me? George Lamson Jr., the only survivor of a 1985 Nevada crash, said, "Survival doesn't always bring resolution," and Ramesh, interviewed from his hospital bed, seems both bewildered and burdened. The escape was miraculous, but the burden of memory may not be survivable in quite the same way. He will need a lot of help. Tony Cable's advice to Ramesh was half in jest and half in awe: buy a lottery ticket. But the real lottery has already occurred. The crash of A171 was not survivable, and yet one man survived. So we tell the story not to revel in spectacle, but to confront the brutal capriciousness of disaster. And in that confrontation, to marvel at the frail resilience of the human body and the bewildering resilience of fate. This isn't a story of a lucky man. It's a story of a man who ran out of luck in every imaginable way, except for one. And the miracle of seat 11A is not just that Vishwash Kumar Ramesh lived, it's that in the face of the horror, confusion, and the fire, he stood and ran and survived.